All right, it's set. Let me know when you get it.
Yeah, we got it.
Seems like we have the go from all three judges. Good morning. Is everybody feeling good to start?
Sorry, give us like like 1.5 minutes. Thank you. I think we should be good.
Hi, can you guys hear me? Okay. Um, is everyone good for case? All right. Time starts my first word. We negate our first contention is waste. Scientific American 2010 writes, the waste and spent nuclear fuel will keep coming and will need to be stored somewhere. Audubongo 18 writes, nuclear reactors produce low-level ionizing radiation. High-level nuclear waste are now likely to lead to catastrophic contamination events. Communities where certain disadvantaged populations, such as low-income and minority groups, reside are where the U.S. stations waste facilities. Environmental racism combines public policies and industry practices to provide benefits for whites while shifting the cost to people of color. Megastar 22 writes, since the mid-20th century, Native American reservations have been subjected to thousands of tons of nuclear waste. a targeted effort by the U.S. government to settle indigenous communities with the most hazardous material ever created by humanity or nature. Over 500 abandoned uranium mines of the Navajo Nation have poisoned residents' drinking water and caused elevated rates of kidney failure and lung disease for generations. Party 20 writes that from the initial extraction of raw uranium to the eventual millennia-long storage of spent nuclear fuel, the nuclear industry relies on the exploitation of rural indigenous lands. Radioactive material that remains deadly for more than 200,000 years and is impossible to clean up. In California, San Onofre alone, 3.6 million tons of radioactive waste is lodged into temporary storage. And UCS 22 writes that these activities have caused tens of hundreds of thousands of deaths. Contended to is terror. The risk of nuclear terror is growing. Molten 25 writes, nuclear terrorism remains a very real issue. The Israel-Hamas war, Hezbollah as a proxy of Iran, highlight a world where non-state and nuclear-seeking states collaborate in warfare, and international terror groups are recruiting Americans. Right-wing terror too. Alam 24 writes, Trump's rollback of initiatives aimed at curbing violent extremism, especially among right-wing movements, the slashing of domestic terrorism resources, and domestic movements that mobilized under the first Trump administration are poised to make a comeback if given a permissive climate. The Fermi would create two risks. First is by increasing enriched uraniums. Pashby 2025 writes that enriched uranium can be used to fuel SMRs. Interest in a nuclear reactor spurred by the US government funding threatens to undermine that system and can be understood to mean that the creation of dirty bombs. The potential security and proliferation risks are real, and states and non-state actors will see their way to accessing a type of nuclear material that they could previously almost never imagine getting hold of. SMRs increase weapons risk, and the industry's vision for SMRs substantially complicates the security of nuclear material. Design measures cannot meaningfully guard against the diversion of nuclear material by SMR operators, and a greater number of sites and more material creates more opportunities for bad actors. This is the missing piece for extremists. NAE 19 writes, the main obstacle to a terrorist planning a nuclear nightmare would be acquiring material. Highly enriched bomb-grade uranium is produced for some reactors and might be diverted to terrorists. Second is plutonium. NAE 19 writes, produced by the nuclear burning of uranium in reactors, plutonium is an ideal fuel for nuclear explosives. Their theft or purchase on the black market by terrorists, sophisticated terrorists could buy the innards of a dismantled bomb, and they might even build a more powerful device equaling or exceeding the force of the Hiroshima bomb. It's likely, as Earnhardt 21 writes, far-right extremists represent a unique danger because of their prevalence in the military and might infiltrate nuclear facilities, where they could access sensitive information and nuclear materials. And nuclear security efforts fail. NNSA writes that although the efforts by the U.S. improved nuclear security around the world, significant challenges remain due to an increased need for nuclear materials in an environment of heightened political instability and terrorist activity. Evolving and disruptive technologies and cyber vulnerabilities threaten nuclear facilities. And even one attack escalates turns every impact. Lewis 18 writes, a small bomb would cause an unprecedented catastrophe. Consequences propagate worldwide. Global distrust would spark rising tensions that lead to nuclear use. A decrease in self-control leads to escalation of present conflict, and an economic depression would decline trade. Tensions could lead to a collapse of the nuclear order, and chaos would threaten governance at all levels. That causes extinction. Star 14 writes, a small nuclear war would include catastrophic disruptions of global climate. Nuclear firestorms would produce millions of tons of smoke. No crops could be grown, leading to a famine that would kill most human populations. That's Renegade.
Okay, before we begin, I just need to ask my partner one thing. So we're gonna take a little bit of prep starting. Okay, that's 15 seconds.
Oh wait, I actually have a quick question. Could you just send like doc, just so we don't have to like call for cards?
Yeah.
All right, cool.
In the meantime, I do want to apologize because my sickness is at like its highest point right now, so it might affect my speaking a little bit, but it should be fine.
Are y'all fine with giving him like 10, 15 seconds of leeway? If that's okay.
15 is too much. I think 5 is
15, 10, oh, 5. Yeah, sure. Let's go.
I sent
Oh, you sent it. Sorry, I'm not seeing it yet, but I'll give a thumbs up when you see it. And then my partner. Mm, I'm not seeing it. I think it's just my inbox. Oh, now I see it. Now I see it.
okay.
Alright.
In that case, is everyone ready for me to begin my speech? All right, perfect.
Wait, can you also send doc? If you want to send after speech, that's fine as well.
Oh,
Oh
yeah.
yeah, we can send doc. Hold on.
Okay. Just in case, I can't hear you that well because the flu.
Wait, Paul, are you adding in the like the overview stuff? Or no.
No, no.
No. So just as we cut it, right?
Yep.
Okay.
Wait,
Let me
add that
post.
one evidence I told you to add though.
What evidence?
The one I told you on call.
Um, let me paste this stuff in first,
Okay.
and then I'll put in the other evidence because I'm actually. Which tab of the file did you put it in?
Yo, guys, can we do this in like
Yeah,
preps or
could
something?
it, well,
Yeah.
yo, Loki, could I just send case now, and then for that specific piece of evidence,
Hey,
if
this
y'all call for
discussion
it, we'll
is
send absent.
definitely prep. Like
Yeah.
you all need to remove like 15 seconds from your prep.
All right,
Like I
all
don't
right.
want to.
That's fine. So
Yeah,
30
that's fine. All right, yeah, 15 seconds. Actually, make it 20. Make it 20.
for 20 seconds. Is that fine with everyone? Okay. I'm just writing that down. Okay. In that case, if everyone's ready, time begins now. We affirm contention one is grid stability. Brink of grid failure is now. Wilkerson 24 explains soaring energy demands and unprecedented heat waves place the U.S. on the brink of a widespread grid failure. Electricity demand is not met now. Nuclear is key. Sturgeon 25 explains critical gaps between current nuclear supply demands will surge 50% due to AI centers and new manufacturing. EVs urgent action. Policy action is needed. Nuclear energy must meet demand. Nuclear provides stability. Renewables can't solve Latif 23. Grid stability is nuclear intermittency persists with renewables. Development of storage is not here yet. Nuclear can increase power fast, bring stability to the grid. Grid reliability is key to military control. Keys 15 explains must be online every hour. BMD systems are critical to protecting our homeland 24/7. Can stand ready to respond to threats. Fast-paced military decisions are key to solving global war. Garmin 17. American military must adapt to keep pace with the speed of war. We must deter threats like China. IJAS 24 explains that growing competition between the United States and China triggers global conflict. A small skirmish could escalate into nuclear exchange. Contention 2 is space. Colonization is physically impossible now. Scale 25. Mars is being discussed more seriously than ever before. Humans face a set of risks. Deep space radiation particles can pass easily through the spacecraft. However, swift action is key. Political will is sufficient now, but volatile in the future. McGrath 24. Technology and funding challenges have hampered crewed flights to Mars. It's short enough to make it tangible, but the political situation will change before it can be realized. Investment is needed. Technology exists, but can't be scaled up. UPAL 25. Nuclear fusion technology is costly. Developing fusion propulsion requires considerable financial investment. Scaling up support could accelerate progress. Boost supplies. Mulder 20. Chemical rockets are not nearly fast enough. The longer an astronaut is in transit, the more supplies they need to carry with them. Overall colonization solves extinction. Briner 23. It's a matter of time, not if. On Earth, humans will go extinct. Humans will be wiped out by an asteroid strike, nuclear war, or the climate. Worst case scenarios are understudied. Every second matters. Backsteed 14. Loss equal to 10 to the power 14 lives per second of delayed colonization. Some planets hospital to life. Contention 3 is upgrades. Meltdowns are inevitable. It's only a matter of time. Fox 24. Nuclear disasters are caused by human error, mechanical failures, and natural disasters. The U.S. nuclear fleet is old, an average of 42. Aging infrastructure is prone to compromises and safety. Stations are vulnerable to vulnerable strikes and terrorism. Affirming solves through upgrades. As Tariq 24 explains, that constructing new plants requires billions and spans decades. Extending a life of an existing plant costs significantly less. Older plants achieve higher efficiencies, further driving down costs. Aging infrastructure poses increased risks. Life extension projects identify potential vulnerabilities. Two subpoints. First is accidents. Accident risks peak now. Deneen 24. Most plants were built more than 40 years ago, vulnerable to unprecedented hazards. Every plant in the country is located where climate change is set to worsen. The NRC has not conducted an analysis necessary. Investment means improvement. It solves the negative always on time frame and scope. RAM 23. It is time to move to more advanced nuclear safety, waste minimization, and true renewability. Molten salts, liquid metal, and helium recycle waste provides fuel. Mining improvements for uranium for seawater, molten salt storage systems for improving load, and retrofitting existing oil and gas-based refineries. Otherwise, meltdown causes extinction. Hodges 19. Water will heat up, boil away, and uncover spent fuel rods. This will lead to fires and release radioactivity in the atmosphere, an extinction level event. Subpoint B is nuclear terrorism. Risk of nuclear terror is growing in the Middle East. Molten 25. Nuclear terrorism remains really real. The Israel-Hamas war, Hezbollah, the proxy of Iran, highlighted the world in which non-state actors seeking nuclear weapons collaborate in warfare. International terror groups are recruiting Americans. Also, right-wing terror. Earnhardt 21 explains far-right extremists represent a unique danger because of their prevalence in the military and might infiltrate nuclear facilities where they access nuclear materials. Nuclear facilities are vulnerable to attacks, and Hiroshima 2027, it is less likely a U.S. reactor would survive the impact of a light aircraft carrier with high explosive excessive non-site violations by the nuclear NRC constitute a sign of complacency and vulnerability. Individuals were allowed unescorted access to protected areas. Upgrades boost security. -25. Nuclear facilities face increasing risk from cyber attacks, insider threats, and unauthorized drone usage. NRC's latest assessment emphasized the need for threat detection and rapid response facilities must implement multi-layered security systems through innovation. They can stay ahead of emerging threats. Facilities can maintain safety. Even one attack escalates, turns heavy impact buoys 18. A terrorist attack, nuclear attack would cause unprecedented catastrophic consequences, go prominently worldwide global distress, spark tensions, nuclear use, decrease self-control, escalate present tensions, and the emergence of new ones. That causes extinction per the STAR evidence that they read in their case. For these reasons, we urge an affirmative ballot in today's round. Is everyone ready for crossfire?
Mhm.
Okay. You can
Okay.
ask the first question.
All right. Let's talk about your impact on C1. Why would China strike first?
Because tensions are going up and because China's hegemony is going up, which means that they might feel that they're stronger than the US.
Wait,
May I-
so for the past like 2 decades, China's hegemony and their tensions have been going up. Why
It's not
haven't they
higher than the
attacked yet?
US right now. Our evidence
When does it get
specifically
higher?
I was about to answer that. So our evidence specifically finds that U.S. hegemony is going to collapse in 2025. It's on the brink right now. So as soon as the U.S. hegemony goes down and China sees that there's an open target on the U.S., that they're stronger than the U.S., then they will strike. May I ask you a question now?
Yeah.
So on your argument about waste, what does the negative do to solve this waste that's happening in the status quo?
We're saying that it's just worse to put more waste in the environment and on indigenous
You're
lands.
arguing to maintain this current waste in the status quo though, with no
No,
solutions.
because first of all, the aft does nothing to solve because historically, even when the US has increased investment into nuclear energy, they've never increased investment into cleanup efforts. We are saying that even if a bad problem exists right now, you shouldn't put more waste on indigenous land just because it exists and make it even worse. Let's talk about your contention. Let's talk about upgrades, right? On your linked evidence for nuclear terror, what is the author of your linked evidence, like the Manassas evidence?
I'm not too sure what the author is.
It comes from a blog from a security company, right?
Okay.
So first of all, does a security company have an incentive to write what they write?
Okay, that's not the point. Our argument is that the nuclear companies have an incentive to improve their infrastructure for multiple reasons because upgrading their infrastructure is much cheaper than building a new one and is much more quicker to do. So even if like they have an incentive to say that it is good, it's because it truly is good, and also they have an incentive to build this infrastructure and make these upgrades.
Okay.
Okay, so on your second argument about terror, again, what do you do to solve right-wing terror?
Again, because we're the neg, we're advocating that the aft world is worse. So we're saying that because you're increasing investment into nuclear reactors, you're because you're increasing investment into nuclear energy, you're making it more susceptible for terrorism because now
Wait,
these people have access to things like plutonium and uranium.
a quick follow-up. In your uniqueness, you admit that right-wing terror and Middle Eastern terror is inevitable. So if it's inevitable in the status quo, shouldn't we take some action instead of just sitting on our hands and waiting for it to happen?
No, we don't say nuclear terrorism is inevitable. We say that the specific reason they haven't launched nuclear terror attacks is because they don't have access to things like enriched uranium and plutonium, which would change in the aft world. That's cross.
Okay.
Okay, structure of the speech is going to go straight down the F case. I'll send
You're
Doc.
gonna be sending that. Okay.
Yeah, I got you. I'll send Doc for everything that's carded. Give me 1 sec. Okay. Actually, you know what, that's fine. I'll just send, there's gonna be some like rhetoric in there, but everything should be carded. Okay. And then yeah. Let me know when you get it and then I'll begin rebuttal.
All right, I'll let you know when I get it.
I just got it.
Okay, cool.
Mm.
Zach, are you good?
Yeah, now I'm good. Thank you.
Cool.
You gonna read some analytics or is this straight off the dome?
I think most of the rhetoric I kept. There's gonna be some analytics and terror. But
Alright.
all the evidence that I cite come from case. I'll let you know.
All right.
Okay. All new evidence is sent, basically. Cool. Okay, everyone ready? All right. Time begins. Oh, straight down the case. Time starts. Now, starting the C1 on grid stability, first turn development of nuclear energy trades off results in grid congestion, directly trading off with other types of renewable energy. Discolor 24 finds that nuclear dominance over grid capacity can block the connection of new renewable energy projects, allowing for continued fossil fuel usage. Example in Romania, delayed grid investments due to uncertainty of new nuclear units have also meant that capacity bottlenecks exist today for renewables online. And that's why Japan, despite years of nuclear energy, still heavily relies on fossil fuels today. But second, delayed nuclear energy lacks the ramp power necessary to solve for peak demand on the electrical grid. Jacobson 24 finds that nuclear itself never matches the power demand. In France, with one of the most advanced nuclear energy programs, the maximum ramp rate is 1 to 5% per minute, which means they still need natural gas. That also means on their impact on military readiness, nuclear does not do enough. Skip the next card. Third, non-unique grid stability is being solved in the status quo through Trump's executive order, unleashing American energy. No reason to vote F, because the best case scenario, McLaughlin 25 tells you that Trump tells you it's time to really put a heavier foot on the gas pedal and get things moving. Trump's executive order could potentially lead to meaningful reforms in sitting and permitting procedures. On the impact, first, the past years, China's hegemony has been up, tensions have been rising, no attack. But second, Xi doesn't invade for 4 reasons. First, he already has a project for his legacy, which is the BRI. Second, he cares about domestic problems like the economy, which is why he won't launch a war unless directly attacked. Third, because of Russia's failure in Ukraine, he's very cautious right now. And fourth, China has a no first use policy, so don't let them link into nuclear war or extinction later in the round. Go to their C2 on space colonization. First, testing nuclear carrying spacecraft sparks nuclear accidents and global proliferation. The Fulcher 19 evidence tells you that risks include a launch failure and it would come down in somebody else's country. Coming down is uranium, enough for several nuclear weapons. About 20% of launches have failures. It creates a precedent for other countries. Cut the card there. Accidents cause nuclear war, star 15. Launch-ready missiles allow counterstrike before detonations confirm whether the attack is real, resulting in accidental nuclear war. This prereqs our case because before we can actually successfully colonize Mars, we need to A, test the rocket, and B, actually launch the rocket. Insofar as there is a 20% fail, even without the complications of nuclear energy, at best, you risk nuclear war first and colonization next. But by that time, colonization doesn't matter because we're all extinct. Second, non-unique Musk is going to get nuclear power from Russia if we don't invest. Osborne 25 finds that Putin says Russia could supply a nuclear power plant for Musk's Mars mission, and it was the second time that they've spoken of a potential cooperation with Musk this month. That's really bad because more cooperation between Russia and the US, A, risks hegemony by validating Russia even amongst allies and in the midst of the Ukraine war, but B, risks more use of Starlink, which is a satellite internet service created by SpaceX used in military communications that risks all future global conflicts if Russia was able to access it. Onto the C3 on meltdowns. Start on subpoint A on accidents. First, turn new SMRs will create much more waste. Carl 22 finds that reactors will increase the energy equivalent volumes of a bunch of different chemicals by factors of up to 35. SMR waste streams will bear significant radiochemical differences. The only risk of offense is of new poorly built reactors, which is our case, and that probably strains the NRC, which decks their case on the short term. But second, no impact. Even if there's a nuclear accident, it would be unlikely to cause significant harm or casualty loss. Fukushima proves empirically. WNA 24 finds that a severe accident in the US nuclear power plant would not be likely to cause any immediate deaths. Cut the card there. On terror. They have one piece of evidence that just says security measures are necessary, not that they actually work or that they will actually be implemented. Second, the Menace is a blog that cites no evidence, has no author, and is literally from a security company trying to convince people to buy their technology. That's a real, I would argue you prefer all of our evidence that tells you it's not possible. But then the Narasima evidence cites structural problems with nuclear security that facility upgrades don't change, like security guards lying and diverting materials and falling asleep on the job. That only supercharges our argument. That's why you can extend a couple of pieces of evidence from our C2 on terror. The Nay 19 evidence and Pashvi evidence from 2025 tell you that design measures cannot meaningfully guard against the diversion of nuclear material by SMR operators in a greater number of sites, and more material fundamentally creates more opportunities for bad actors. There is no way to design around this fact. The Earnhardt et al. 21 evidence is also really good because it tells you that terrorist groups are prevalent in the army, numerous instances of like white supremacists being found in the 2000s. That's why the evidence tells you they can infiltrate the army and infiltrate nuclear facilities. Design measures do not solve that. But lastly, the NNSA evidence from the National Nuclear Security Administration tells you significant challenges remain despite efforts by the US. Security measures always fail. Vote next.
Okay.
I'll take running prep.
What's up everyone, and welcome back to this YouTube channel. Today in this video I'm going to show you how you can run a C or C++ program in your Visual Studio Code on Windows. So program in your Visual
All right, I'm good. The
I was
order
wondering,
is
by the way.
all right. The order is just gonna be RK staircase. Let me scroll to top. All right. Start on grid. We can see that Trump already unleashed American energy, which means that the trade-off term doesn't matter, because insofar as fossil fuels are increasing, then that also trades off renewables. But even so, we would argue that the offense will always flow aft, because insofar as you do renewables, since fossil fuels are the current prevalent industry, then that probably means that trade-off is going to go against fossil fuels, not against renewables. Second, on space, their testing bad. DA is super, super, super bad. First of all, they would probably give other countries a heads up before even testing in the first place, which means that there's no risk of accidental miscalc. Second of all, other countries have tested small nuclear reactors in rockets before, and this hasn't happened. And these rockets have probably failed before. And third, like their evidence is really bad, because it talks about because their link evidence, their uniqueness evidence is about how you need a reactor on Mars, but their testing evidence is just about powering the rocket in the first place using nuclear. Finally, NASA has a ton of regulations. There's no reason why they'd be using weapons-grade uranium in a rocket. None of their evidence says they will be. On Musk will buy power from Mars. Again, this evidence is super misconstrued. It's literally about how Putin offered to give Musk like nuclear materials a couple months ago, but he hasn't said yes. And also there's sanctions on Russia, and negotiations with Russia aren't pulling through, which means that they're probably not going to accept. On accidents, we'll concede that there's no harm to accidents, which means that that kicks out of the turn. On terror, first of all, on the insight about Menace, no, the Menace evidence is not from a company that does nuclear security, which means that there's no conflict of interest. Second, on security jobs falling asleep on the job, this literally makes no sense, specifically because like that uniqueness flows our direction. If there's a lack of protection right now, then that means that modern modernization and enhancing reform through the app would probably increase security. There's no way to do security. There's no way to do security, and terrorists want to get a nuclear weapon right now. That probably flows to us because that means that the only risk of solvency exists in the app. On right-wing terror infiltrates, we'd argue that we both read the same card, we would argue that if there is a lasting incentive for right-wing terror groups to infiltrate nuclear facilities, then they do so now, especially because Trump is president, which means that you uniquely have to solve now by doing the app. Let's go to ways. First of all, new consent agreements literally passed a few years ago, which bar waste dumping and give indigenous groups huge authority to sue, and their evidence does not account for this. Overall, what this means is that this is defense because insofar as there's consent groups, I mean that the government can't just dump waste at will. But second, turn it, because nuclear waste can only exist in a fraction of cases because France empirically recycled waste. Right 24, low-level radioactive metals that comprise 97% of nuclear waste were able to process 500,000 tons of metal like iron and steel. Insofar as this is true, that means that governments have an economic and political incentive to boost manufacturing by recycling waste rather than dumping. Finally, Talman 24 explains that every uranium mine and ignore that. Finally, there's no impact. Any nuclear development requires consultation by indigenous groups impacted. There's a new law called the Free Prior and Informed Consent Act. On nuclear prolif, a couple overarching responses. First, new SMRs use low-enriched uranium, not bomb-grade material, which means that enrichment levels needed for weapons are strictly monitored by the IAEA, which means that only old reactors per our case lead to terror. Second, reactor designs today are proliferation-resistant. Advanced safeguards detect Never mind. Sorry. Third, terrorists are getting fissile material, which requires state collapse or theft from a heavily guarded facility. It's extremely unlikely, which means that uniqueness flows after because currently all of these reactors are deteriorating right now. Fourth, nuclear supply chains are trying blockchain and advanced monitoring, but it's not implemented yet, which means that you actually need to do the affirmative to monitor things like black markets and weapons leaks. Overall, what this means is that affirming is the only risk of solvency to nuclear terror, insofar as their uniqueness concedes that there are massive security breaches right now, and that right-wing terror groups want to hijack. On their link too, this link literally doesn't exist because they don't explain how the black market is actually tied to nuclear energy. Look, there's zero warrant linking it to the resolution. It literally just says that terrorist groups can already get it through the black market, which either means that it's A, non-unique, or B, they don't even read a warrant. Don't let them read one in summary. On far-right extremists, we'd argue that you're still going to on-net vote for us because insofar as right-wing extremists have an incentive to hijack nuclear facilities right now, and Trump is president, and security measures are super weak, that means that you're always going to vote on risk of solvency.
I forgot to ask before your speech, but can you send Doc with all the new evidence you read on our case? I know frontlining was
Yeah,
on.
sorry.
Yeah.
I was going halfway up.
You're good. Just any evidence.
Okay. Cool. Actually, I think I could set my whole time. All right. Are you fine if I use like 5 seconds to like mark the dot? Because I didn't read all the cards yet.
That's
All
fine.
right. Thank you. I think that's all of that. All right, sent.
Okay. I'll let you know when I get it, then we can start cross. Or actually, we might take prep before cross. Actually, yeah, we'll take prep before. Okay. Is it just two cards?
Yeah, because we read like the same evidence as you.
Okay. Sounds good. We'll take a minute of prep starting now. That was 50 seconds. Oh, sorry, no, that was a minute. Yeah. I'll write that down. Okay, ready for cross?
Please leave your message.
Oh, sorry.
Oh, damn, I wouldn't take
Yeah.
that.
Yeah, I was trying to call.
Yeah, I wouldn't take that. Yeah.
We can have cross. You can have first question.
Perfect. Time starts now. Let's talk about our scale. You tell me that France is empirically recycling nuclear waste.
Yeah.
So first, what percent of all of their nuclear waste is being recycled? And second, has the US shown any initiatives or any sign that they're going to do the same?
All right. Well, like insofar as France has been able to recycle 500,000 tons of steel, which is like a significant amount of raw materials for the industry, 500,000 tons.
Is steel
Insofar as
like
that's true, that means that since, like, obviously Trump is very focused on manufacturing, and since there's a political and economic incentive to increase steel production and iron production, that probably means that the US is going to implement it too, because there's an intrinsic political and economic need.
so Trump cares about the environment all of a sudden, and he's going to actually care about recycling nuclear
Wait,
waste.
hold on. That's literally like a straw man question. I'm not saying that he's doing it because he cares about the environment. I'm saying that he's doing it, he would rather recycle than do waste for pragmatic reasons, which is still defense on your link because your link is dependent on the United States dumping waste on indigenous lands. But insofar as there's an economic and political incentive to recycle rather than dump waste right now in the status quo due to new innovations, like your link is no risk of triggering. Could I have a question?
Go for it.
All right, cool. Uh, let's go to your second link on Terra, right?
Mhm.
Like you don't even read like a link to the resolution for black markets.
Yeah, so
Like,
basically, yeah, so the argument is, right, is in the AF world, by investing in nuclear energy and spurring like nuclear facilities and building nuclear power plants, whatever else you advocate for in your case, you give terrorist groups more opportunity because you give them more access
wait,
to material, which
but
means
I'm
that
sorry. I'm
if you
sorry.
could,
That's
if you could
not
please,
answering my question.
if you could please
Because
let me,
my question is, why
if
does
you could
increasing
please
the
let me
amount of
finish
nuclear
talking.
reactors?
Zach, could you let me finish talking?
Okay, sure.
Thank you. On plutonium fuel, we tell you that when you build more nuclear bombs, sorry, when you invest more nuclear energy, that means that there's more plutonium that's being in these nuclear facilities, which thus means that there's more being stolen and being sold on the black market for terrorist groups to buy and use to build nuclear weapons. Does that answer your question?
No.
Okay. Please enlighten me then.
No, all I was understanding was, uh,
I
my
think
my problem is wait, I'm sorry. My problem is this analysis was nowhere in the tagline nor in the highlighted part of the card. There was
it,
no specific card saying that increasing the amount of nuclear reactors would also increase the amount of black market activity.
it
Like
absolutely does.
I don't understand why you can bring up this
Because
new substantiation to case in
that's not
summary.
new. What Catherine told you in case is that AF gives more opportunity and more access to material. Then we branch off and say that's number one, uranium, and number two, plutonium. I think the link is pretty clear, but that's
I,
cool.
I'm sorry. I think they just okay.
We'll take like a minute more of prep starting now. That was a minute and 5. The order is gonna go neg wing or neg af with wing in between. Is everyone ready? Okay, cool. Starting our contention one about waste, they have a couple of responses. First, they say that they have to prevent waste dumping, but first, that's an analytic with no evidence. But then second, the US government has historically violated agreements in the past that said they needed to protect the environments or indigenous lands. Historically, they have violated. We can assume that in the future they will. Second, they say that France has recycled waste, but first we would say that what France does is not what the US does. Historically, the US always recycles waste, or the US always puts waste on indigenous land. But then second, Trump doesn't actually care about the environment. There's no indication historically, and it's probably easier and cheaper for nuclear companies to just dump waste instead of recycle them. Third, they say that they have to consult indigenous lands. Their evidence just says should, and it's not even about development, it's about dumping waste on indigenous lands. That's why Extend the Adebayo evidence tells you that waste is always dumped on indigenous lands, and the Mandatory evidence that tells you that historically the Navajo have had 500 abandoned uranium mines with 3.6 million tons of waste. That's why the UCS evidence tells you that tens of thousands of people have died in the past, and tens of thousands will probably die in the future. You're going to prioritize this for a couple of reasons. The first is that policymakers care about these big issue like things like climate and nuclear war, but marginalized groups get ignored, which is your role as a judge to vote for the most probable impact. Probability comes first. First, other countries always have conflicting actors trying to solve nuclear war or climate change, but when you look at time, you're going to build a nuclear reactor in like 32 years, while the impacts of manufacturing undisposed waste are still harming indigenous people. On time frame and probability, these outweigh. But then lastly, on climate, again, policy always goes towards high magnitude problems, but indigenous land is unique to nuclear energy. There are always going to be a bunch of other actors solving for that. On our CETO on terror, first, on the breaches response, none of our evidence says that breaches are happening right now. The past evidence tells you that the affirming is the risk, because now people actually have the access to enrich uranium. But then second, on group all of their other responses together. First, we would say that the risk comes from SMR, like people diverting the fuel. It's not about breaching the security of it. But then second, we would say that uniquely having access to things like enriched uranium and plutonium is the risk in which nuclear terrorism and this development comes in. The only risk is on the app. On their case, a couple of responses. First, extend the turn on C1 that says trade-off with renewables increases congestion. Don't let them pick it out, because it makes it uniquely worse, because you're increasing reliance on fossil fuels that supercharges the climate change impacts and the harms on the indigenous people. Second, on space, extend the Felcher evidence tells you, because all of their responses first are analytics without evidence, the link is perception. Even if we warn them, first of all, that's not guaranteed to happen. But then second of all, countries can still perceive it as the US trying to increase nuclear escalation, which is why the Felcher evidence has those conceded tells you that historically there's a 20% risk of launches failing, and then that means that when you're able to have this nuclear fuel and other countries have access to it, that increases the chance of nuclear war. That means that at the end of the day, prereqs are case, because before we successfully colonize Mars, we need to test a rocket and launch the rocket, which means that best you risk nuclear war first. On upgrades, first of all, realize that they dropped the crawl evidence that tells you that SMRs create 35 times more waste. That's still uniquely worse than goes conceded for indigenous people. But then lastly, their evidence is really, really bad. The NARCEMA evidence tells you that there's no incentive uniquely right now, but then once you increase the access to nuclear fuel and plutonium, that's when you actually see people trying to develop nuclear weapons.
All right, cool. We'll take a little bit of prep.
Wait, I hate to be that person, but I think you're out of prep.
All right.
Wait, Zach, where are you pasting the stuff, by the way, before I start?
The doc summary tab.
The order of my speech will start on our arguments and then move on to my opponent's arguments. Is everyone ready? All right, perfect. Time starts now. At the top, extinction comes first on magnitude and prereq. You can't do anything if everyone's dead. Probability does not matter because the fraction of infinity is still infinity. On the turn, we have conceded that the Trump non-unique that tells you that energy is already going up right now and renewables are going down. So there's no implication on the turn, and they also don't extend the impact that climate change leads to extinction. There's no offense here. On C2, colonization is impossible now as nuclear energy is required to live on Mars. Investment is key and technology is currently in development, not being scaled up. That's key. Extinction is inevitable on Earth, as there are an infinite number of existential risks, nuclear asteroids, etc. Every degree counts. On the turn, they say that there's nuclear accidents. They have conceded that the U.S. will test in secure environments and will communicate before testing, which avoids any miscalc scenarios. Second, they have conceded that accidents have already occurred, nothing happened. They don't give a unique reason why it's different right now. And insofar as accidents already occur, there won't be any miscalc scenarios because people know that like there won't be like such a big impact. Third, their evidence is about accidents from reactors on Mars. It's really miscut. Four, there's no warrant why spaceships have uranium on them. There will be no accidents. And lastly, the U.S. is already slightly experimenting with nuclear tech right now, but they don't have enough funding. That means accidents are inevitable in the status quo, meaning it's try or die to improve this through nuclear energy and investment and innovation. Any risk of U.S. development means you affirm. The weighing is simple. Extinction is inevitable on Earth. The only way to prevent extinction is to go on Mars. On C4. Terror is growing now in the Middle East, and through domestic exports, U.S. reactors are vulnerable to structures not secure and allow military extremists and advocacy to improve against cyber attacks, insider threats, and unauthorized access, multi-layered security systems, and innovation. Even one attack escalates and is the sparks global distrust, sparking tensions and nuclear use. It is simple. They have dropped our uniqueness evidence, which says that right now meltdowns and terror are inevitable. Even if they don't read the evidence, we do in case. The only risk of solving is affirming as extinction is inevitable in the status quo. Even if you buy their indictment, it doesn't matter because affirming has some risk of working. At that point, our link triggers before theirs because it's happening in the upgrades, which short circuits their argument based on sequencing. On the framing a little bit more, the counter role of the ballot is to combat existential risk on the layers of fiat. First, before moral uncertainty, preserving humanity means we can better orient our value systems. Prereqs, they're framing on the highest level. Second, you also have a moral obligation to vote to help the people who are dying from things like nuclear war, extinction, existential risk on Earth. Third, material death and extinction is a prior question, structural violence. Weapon 03, a prerequisite expression is existence. Respecting the other must ensure the other continues to exist and protect it on Earth. And lastly, temporal freeriding. Future generations that cannot be seen or felt are the most underrepresented in policymakers. Lastly, historically, existential risks bring communities together, which actually solve structural violence in the long term. On their case, start on their C1 waste. Extend the overview. They say we have no evidence. No, we do. It tells you that the U.S. must get consent from the indigenous people. They say that the U.S. would violate, but the U.S. wouldn't violate now, even if they did in the past, because morals have changed. Second, they tell you that the U.S. won't invest in these recycling programs. We give you the accurate incentive as to why it's economically beneficial to turn these things into steel, which is why they would do it. Which is why they would do it. If they turn it into steel, that actually solves for waste. Again, it's try or die to help these indigenous people in the first place. On their C2. Just look at probability. They can't prove that nuclear reactors will use uranium or plutonium insofar as new nuclear materials like thurium exist which are more abundant and can't turn it into nuclear weapons. Even then, extend that nuclear reactors don't use uranium that are required for weapons. That means that A, new reactors are good, and B, we must upgrade current reactors as they are the only risk of prolif right now. For these reasons, we urge a negative ballot. Is everyone ready for Grand Cross?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Y'all can have first question.
Okay. Grace, you have a question?
You can go for it.
Okay, let's talk about like preventing waste dumping, right? The only thing you tell me in your summary is that the US won't dump waste because morals have changed. What exactly does that mean?
It's not morals have changed, it's laws that have changed because all your front lines have the word historical in it. But the fact is you can't put stuff from the 1980s and say it's the same as now. Because our evidence is specific to the free and prior consent law, which was passed like a couple years ago. So I would argue that one that postdates. Two, you only interact with the moral level of the claim, but not necessarily the legal ramifications.
And just to
Wait,
quickly
okay.
add that, we would also argue that any risk of this recycling of the waste happening is critical to vote for us, as we all agree that waste is happening now. But yeah, you can respond.
Yeah, sure. So the first thing is that your summary speaker specifically said it's because morals are changing. But then second of all, I'm sure that there were laws in the past that were trying to prevent like either economic or not economic, environmental damage or dumping on indigenous lands. But the reason the US government doesn't follow those laws is because it's A, either easier or B, cheaper to do so.
Wait, hold on. First of all, this is an analytic that was not at all in your front lines. This is completely new in Grand Cross. Second, I
I
would
think it
argue
was in my
second again, the free and prior consent law, like you don't interact with our evidence. It's a groundbreaking law that essentially forces consent, forces
forces
the
consent.
United, yeah, no, sorry, it forces the United States government to ask for consent and get approval before they can go on. Otherwise, indigenous groups get huge leverage in court. And the fact is that the government doesn't like going through lengthy court proceedings or court clog.
Wait, so you're telling me the alternative is not that the US government can't dump waste? The alternative is that they can dump waste, but then indigenous people still have a little bit of more like leverage in court when they're trying to dispute things.
It's because the leverage in court in the first place means that the US government is deterred from dumping in the first place.
Wait, that's just an analytic. You're telling me that they just have more leverage in court. It doesn't actually stop the US government from dumping waste.
Wait, hold on. I feel like you're straw manning like what I'm saying. All right, first, there's laws that these are two separate responses, right? One is just my explanation in Grand Cross, but the first one is that laws right now are preventing dumping because they require consent beforehand, right? Insofar as Native American groups are denying consent, there's no dumping in the status quo, and that post dates on recent.
But the other problem is
the second explanation is that due to things like court clog, the government isn't even going to risk a lawsuit in the first place, even if you don't buy that these laws are binding, because they don't want to spend tons of money on lawyers and time on court proceedings when they could be doing other stuff. Even then, you still concede the actor analysis on the term. So
yeah, that's fine. That's cross.
Okay, we're gonna take how much do we have left? 55 seconds. We're gonna take that starting now. Okay, structure of the speech, it's gonna go straight down. It'll start neg wing af. Yeah. Okay, I'll signpost. Everyone ready? Okay. Time begins now. You're voting for the neg on radioactive waste. They give you a couple of responses. First is that they say that the US must get consent. First, their evidence just says it should. Second, it's literally an analytic. But then third, these agreements are always violated. That's why you see that in the past, there's always been waste dumped on indigenous lands, like 500 uranium mines or abandoned uranium mines. But then second, on they say that it's economically beneficial to recycle. First, there's absolutely zero evidence that we're going to do it. But second, if it's so economically beneficial, why haven't we done it yet? It's because the US does not care, and Trump especially does not care about the environment. At that point, extend it pretty cleanly. The scammer evidence tells you that waste is going to keep coming when we invest in nuclear energy. That's really bad because it's always dumped. The Adebago 16 evidence tells you that it's always dumped on indigenous land. That's really bad because it A, poisons the water, B, causes a bunch of radioactive radiation. That's also really detrimental. Sparty 20 finds that the land is always exploited. There's been like millions of tons of waste onto the land. You're always going to prefer this for a couple of reasons. Because first, remember that policymakers care about the climate, but marginalized groups always get ignored. Probability comes first, as security measures have never worked, but waste is already poisoning water as we speak. But Chris 22 finds that FPIC is rarely enforced. Prefer the historical analysis because it shows how the US government acts even with these laws in place. Third, other countries have conflicting stats, and fourth, looking at time, the best case scenario is 32 years or like 5 to 6 years to build a reactor. The impacts of manufacturing undisposed waste are still harming indigenous right now. Our impacts trigger first, so their framing on util doesn't apply. Prefer a time frame because by the time they have some wacky extinction scenario, all these indigenous people are still getting constantly ignored. Onto their case, extend the turn on renewables. Remember that increasing grid congestion means that we turn to fossil fuels in the meantime for those 32 years. That's A, worse for extinction, but then B, also works for climate, which affects indigenous communities. But then on space colonization, remember they have no evidence that we're going to warn countries beforehand. Second, there's going to be nuclear accidents. That's what the evidence tells you, 20%. And then third, I would say that we don't have to improve it. We can find other alts. On terror, remember that all of their only evidence just tells you that we should implement security measures, not that we're actually going to, or that they're actually going to work. At that point, look to probability. You're voting for waste.
All right, cool. The order is going to be weighing their case, our case. Actually, no. Let's go their case, weighing our case. The round was over when they went for waste because they fundamentally conceded two key responses. First, they concede the impact defense evidence. Look at the email chain. It doesn't say it should. It says that there's currently a law called the Free and Prior Consent Law, which was recently passed. Also, don't let them get access to any of their historical precedents weighing because this law was newly passed, which means that it postdates all of their weighing. But second of all, they have conceded the turn and they don't interact with their agent analysis, which says that the US government has an economic and political incentive to recycle waste into metal and steel instead of just dumping waste, which means that on net it's outweighs. Furthermore, this postdates because again, their weighing is about probability due to historical precedents. Don't buy any of their weighing because it's a new innovation that happened in the last couple of years, which means that on net, affirming would actually boost the economy without hurting indigenous groups. On our case, they extend two responses. First is the renewables turn. First of all, this doesn't make sense because we already conceded that Trump already unleashed American energy, which means that he's increasing fossil fuels. That means that fossil fuels crowds out renewables independently. This is completely conceded. On the space state, they also conceded that, first of all, their link evidence is not about nuclear reactors on space. It's literally about nuclear reactors on Mars, which means that there's no accident. But second, they've conceded that NASA has specific regulations that prohibit the use of weapons-grade uranium in rockets. Insofar as this is true, they have conceded the existential terror weighing for three reasons. First is moral uncertainty, because preserving humanity means that we can better reorient our value systems, because moral uncertainty suggests that our present axiology might be confused, because there's great value in preserving our ability to recognize value and steer the future accordingly. Second, because existential risk, they have not interacted with the utilitarianism weighing, which is that like a low probability multiplied by existential risk is still infinity, which means that you always prioritize existential risk. Third, extended temporal free riding, because future generations that cannot be seen or felt are the most underrepresented in policy-making spheres, which means that we link invest into structural violence. On net, we're gonna go for space. Actually, no, we're gonna go for terror. Let's go for terror. No, let's go for space. Insofar as we are able to increase space colonization and status quo by putting these nuclear reactors within rockets, that means that overall we at least have a risk of getting off the rock. This also means that you don't buy any of their time frame analysis because again, existential risk is the most important policy issue, and that's why you should always prioritize the only solvency to extinction, because extinction is not unique on Earth. Prioritize space call because nuclear energy makes it viable.
Okay, good round, everyone, and
Good
thank you all.
round.
Round.
Good round.
We'll be back.